I'm Rodman Premack. I'm the Chief Creative Officer of Design Miami, and I'm so happy to see you guys here this morning, and I'm very happy to announce and welcome to the Design Talk stage some friends from Arles, and we've been so thankful and grateful for LUMA's participation in the Design at Large program that's here on the ground floor of the fair. That was curated by a fellow lover of Arles, Francois Allard. And this morning, we're going to speak a little bit about the project with the CEO of LUMA Arles, Mustapha Bouhayati. Thank you so much for being here. Amelie Klein from the Vitra Design Museum, and Lukas from Berlin. Thank you for being here. The title of the talk is Local Intelligence, Universal Applications, and we're really happy you guys could make the time to be with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. No, we're very happy to be here, and obviously having Amelie with us and Lukas. Amelie has been, is a curator at the Vitra Design Museum, and among other exhibitions that she's been curating, there is one that was called Making Africa, that we found particularly interesting and that we could relate to, especially following the project we're building in Arles, which I will talk about very quickly. And Lukas, who is a designer and who has created this very modular and flexible system that we have been using to present the work we have been developing with Atelier LUMA, and which we will talk about, especially in relation to an exhibition that you're working on, dedicated to Victor Papanek, I think. Maybe to start with, I should say a quick word about LUMA. LUMA that we have been developing in Arles. It is one of the projects of the LUMA Foundation that has been created by Maya Hoffman. The project is being developed currently in Arles. The construction started in 2014. Arles is a city located in the south of France, near the Mediterranean coast, in the Camargue region. It's an environment that is it's the area where the Rhone River is actually going into the sea, and it is a very unique setting and a very unique territory. The project is being developed in an old industrial site that was used by the railroad company to build and mend train parts. Part of these buildings are being renovated, and there is a new building that is being constructed and that has been developed with Frank Gehry. It is thought as a group of spaces of various buildings that all have different types and different qualities, different types of equipments. This gives us the possibility to produce and host all types of cultural projects, and basically that's what we have been developing since 2010, and it's a cross-disciplinary platform that allows us to host artists, thinkers, scientists to work together. And maybe just to start with, we started developing Atelier LUMA in 2 years ago. Lukas has been part of it since the beginning. The idea was to try and value natural resources and build on local talents to develop and create new materials. maybe you can talk a little bit about making Africa here, because I think that's the conversation we had yesterday, how you can connect to the local territory and using unique characteristics to, let's say, come down to human scale and find and come close to universal solutions somehow.
Well, so Making Africa was an exhibition that opened at the Vitra Design Museum in 2015, I think. And our main advising curator for the show was Okwi Envezor, who you are probably all familiar with. And he said something really important. He said making locally really is a renegade against a global economy, you know, an economy that really flushes the earth, not only the global south, Africa, of course, but also Europe and other parts of the world with cheap, mass-produced crap, and making something locally with local materials that are really developed on site, as you do, with these really exciting projects with sunflower and algae and salt and whatnot from the area of Arles. I think that's, you know, globalization is something that we all suffer from. The global south, of course, suffers from globalization more than the global north, because we have, you know, more resources and more power against it. But still, globalization is something that affects us all, and that is something that we all have to oppose to, I would say. And so a project like that one is really totally in that spirit.
Thank you. And I think what we are presenting actually currently in the installation we have is the various types of materials that we have rediscovered in a way, and helped people from the region to think of as valuable material. For example, we started working with algae. The Camargue region is considered as a wet zone. It is very sunny, very hot, humid, a lot of light, so algae grows very naturally. And we have worked and invited two designers, Eric and Mathieu, to work together. And following various experiments, we created a biopolymer, which is a bioplastic made of algae. We have used another material. Most of the energy that we're going to produce on the site will be renewable energy produced from sunflower seed. And by mixing sunflower seed waste and the stem, we have created a organic styrofoam. We also are focusing on salt. There is a lot of salt in the region, and we have been working with it pretty much in the same way as Egyptians in old times have been using it, compressed and heated for a certain time. It becomes rock solid and can be used for construction or decoration, for example. And all these materials are produced locally and come from the very unique characteristics of the region. And I think that's where we connected with Amelie and Lukas here, with the notion of having an open territory, in a way, in the same way as we are talking about open source structures that can be used and developed everywhere. It's a method and that can be applicable and replicable in a way to value all types of territories around the globe. And it's another notion of universality, meaning that, you know, there are all types of universalities, as many universalities as there are many territories.
I think what's really interesting here is that sorry, I lost my thread. I had a thought and I lost it. So you talk about universality. Well, that's really the point. You know, what is universal? I mean, oh, I remember. What I wanted to say was, sorry, jump in, I'm sorry. What I think really is really interesting is, harvesting materials that are so easily available, like algae. Nobody uses those algae. I think that is super interesting, and it's very sustainable, and it's totally positive as long as it is something that you also embrace very much, and that is human scale. I think what's most important with the projects, and that's the same here, is that you remain, on a human scale, that you harvest what you need. You don't harvest for global production, and I think that's really at the core of this, to keep it small, to keep it local, to keep it small. That's really something, and to keep it decentralized. And these are really things that I found with my research with the Global South and Africa. And I think that those strategies really make sense for Europe too, because ultimately we all face the same challenges in a way. And that is, how do we use resources sustainably? How do we make a world that is humane? How do we treat ourselves, other people, and the world around us in a way that will stay, so that we don't waste and so on? And I think that's really important.
And with this notion of let's say natural resources that are accessible, the idea of providing people with, let's say, a tool that is easily accessible. And I'm looking at Lukas here because with this system that you have created that can be used anywhere with a very basic solution and approach, can also help empower people. And that's where maybe we can reconnect with Victor Papanek. That maybe Amelie, you're best placed to explain exactly who he is, and Lukas will explain how he finds a connecting point with him.
No, you do.
Well, I mean, it's basically that human scale that you already mentioned. So the elements are modular in that sense, and can be also from different materials. So again, can be adopted to a regional approach, and all structures that we build always show that they could grow, so they never really tell the story that they are finished in that sense. So in the meaning of the atelier LUMA, that is also still growing and developing over time, the structures show that this is possible, and the atelier can grow with the structures and also shrink. And at the moment, the most elements that we see here are still from steel, but that is just one example. So the material is not that important for it. It's more the link between different projects which I'm focusing on. So bringing together, so all the elements are based on one and the same connector, which is scalable again, and very simple, made from 4 elements. At the moment we are lasering them, but they can also be printed in algae. We made already those experiments. So it could also be a tool to bring the different projects that are at the moment happening in Atelier LUMA together in another way, and encourage that collaborative approach. And this, I don't know how you want to link that to Papanek.
Well, I mean, Papanek, Victor Papanek, I don't know who is familiar with him. He's not that well known, unfortunately. Is something like a forefather of social design. So in 1971, he published this book called Design for the Real World, and he was fighting his entire life. He was fighting for sustainable design, and design that is inclusive and humane, and any kind of design, any type of design that goes beyond the form giving of single individual objects. and really understanding design as something bigger. And I think this is really what's happening in Arles and what's happening with your piece. Yes, you have a structure. Yes, there is, there are screws and there are these objects, but it's not about the object. It's really about a bigger question, about modularity, about how do we live, or how do we want to live, how do we want to get together, how do we want to use these structures, and so on. And this is really something very Papanekian that you start thinking about design the very moment you start to think about something, whatever it is, and really question, do I actually really need to produce this, or can I achieve the goal differently? I don't know, share, borrow, or assemble and disassemble in another way, things like this, and then go on and on and on until the very last moment where you think about, so now the function of this functionality is over. What do we do with the remainders and so on? So this is really something that is easy to link to Papanek, the thinking. And I really liked something that you said yesterday. So we had this conversation already, and what you said is that you really relate to Papanek mostly because of his way of dealing with his students. He was this great teacher. He was a very warm and I think fostering his students very much. He would always credit them. He would always push their work, and this is something that's also happening in Arles.
Yeah, and we also talked about the human scale, and you mentioned that because it's Arles is a city of about 35,000 inhabitants. We are developing a project which is quite important in a city that is fairly small, which is quite unusual in France, that is very centralized. It's the type of project you usually find in bigger cities. This has brought us to work differently, both with people, because we do interact with people more easily. There's kind of shorter connections to people somehow, but also to use, let's say, time differently. The way we interact with people and the time we take to develop ideas are quite different from the way it evolves and it is being used in bigger cities where it's quicker and faster probably. And the notion of human scale to me is and to us is super important, and the way your let's say the way Victor Papanek, back to him again, comes up with a solution and asks people to implement them with the local resources, with the local elements that are at hand, is something that very strongly resonates with the way we have been working. And I know that the first elements that you had created with the first connectors, they could be used to connect all types of materials that can be found in any region. And this kind of brings us back to the universality that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, which is of course always a compromise. So we tried to define our standard, which might already sound a bit strange when you think about openness, that you come back to a standardized grid, which forces somehow everybody who contributes to a minimum of standardization to again come to a wider idea of exchange. And then we were just looking for a standard which you anyway find very often already in the world, which is very different to all or most other approaches of systems that try not to link to other systems, to just function well within their logic to create just more purchase. And our connector was, or is the other way around, meant that it's linking to different materials, different designers, and we started that with that grid, which was a very good tool for us in the beginning to have just an idea of what makes that exchange possible. And in software, you have the code, which is very clear to make that exchange possible. And in hardware, it's not that clearly defined what it could be. So it's only one theory of making exchange. And over time, we also realized that maybe the grid loses its importance for us, and it's at the moment in a phase where we are also seeking for other ways of connecting, which I find very interesting, that the whole project also changes in its core over time and is somehow reinterpreted and still totally under construction, I would say, but already working, and with the great opportunity of LUMA, trying it out in a larger scale with different people involved, we can already learn quite a bit in real time, in real use.
I mean, there's such a beautiful metaphor in this. You know, when you connect with someone, you cannot connect with other people. That's,
Yes.
you know, like connecting with some means disconnecting or not connecting with others. I think it's really important to realize that when you talk about universality, it's, you know, of course we want to be inclusive and universal always. I do believe, though, that we have to embrace the fact that when you are, you know, connecting with someone, you're including someone, you're excluding others. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And so if you go for a grid, which is, you know, meant to be, a grid is like, you know, the ultimate modularity. It's like open for everyone, but it's not true. It's also stifling. And I think there's a good metaphor in this. Of course I forgot to look up the name of this lady that I spoke to you yesterday. So she is the former CEO of Microsoft for inclusive design, and she gives these really interesting talks and interviews. And I already told you guys, but not the audience. And she spoke about how, for example, one development that is really useful for some people can be really harming for others. Like when you have your sidewalk and it lowers at the crossroad. That's super, of course, for people who use a wheelchair or, you know, who have a stroller. But it's very dangerous for blind people who don't feel the difference in the level and all of a sudden find themselves in the middle of the cross-section. So there's always, you have to find the balance between including and excluding, and how do you do that? And I think that's really important. And you always have to realize and embrace the fact that when you do something, everything has consequences. You know,
Yes.
And if you go for a grid, then it might seem super open, but then you find out it's not. And then you go for a different solution that will then again excludes other options or people or connections or whatever. And I think that's something that is often overlooked and often, you know, when we talk about universal, I think it's important to realize that, you know, you can't make everyone happy. It's not going to happen.
But when you work at the, let's say, as close as you can to the, again, to the territory where an idea or a project is being developed, and then you look at the resources that are available or the talents that are around, you're probably as close as you can be to the basic human need, which then again can be scaled up in a way, because if we come as close as we can to, you know, to the fundamental needs of people that everybody shares in a way, I think we can come closer to finding local solutions that could be replicable. Or
Yeah, I mean, local is always good,
Yeah.
of course. But I mean, and you know, concentrating on small, on the niche, opens up completely new possibilities. Again, this woman that I can't remember the name of, she talks about how if you design for one-armed people, you know, handicapped people that only have one arm, you actually also design for people who are only temporarily one-armed, like people who broke their arm and have a cast, or that are one-armed because of their situation, because they're carrying a baby. And so when you design for one-armed people, you actually design for a lot more people than just handicapped people. And this is also true for the local. I agree with you. I think local solutions can very much open up. There's a good example for this in the exhibition about Africa that we spoke about earlier. That's text message. It's basically a money transfer system via text message, M-Pesa, and it was developed in Kenya because most people don't comply with the minimum requirements for opening a bank account. So you can transfer money via text messages, which is extremely practical. It's such a good idea. Why can't I just, text money to someone? It makes so much sense, But we have this sophisticated bank system, so we use that. But the truth is that this very specific, very local solution for a country where most people don't have bank accounts, is now implemented in Romania. I don't know how they're doing. I must look this up, actually. I never followed up, but I think it's interesting. It's interesting to look at. Or another thing that I did actually get advertising for just recently from my bank when I went to Africa. I saw a lot of advertising for prepaid credit cards. So it's basically not a credit card, but a kind of a prepaid debit card or something like that, because a lot of purchasing online can only be done by credit card. And so many people were excluded from that, and so the banks there or some financial institutions developed these prepaid cards, and I did receive an advertising for a prepaid credit card just recently from my bank. I think this is true, You find that you have these very local solutions for very local problems. It seems local problems, but then you find out they make so much sense for a bigger, maybe even more global audience.
Oh, that's great. If you come back to the natural resources, we tried to talk a little bit about what we call open territory, and I don't know whether it makes sense or not, but trying to create a parallel with the approach of the open source, and how I would say, how could we imagine let's say a project such as the one we are developing, obviously that involves certain investment, but Atelier LUMA is actually more based on an idea than an investment, actually. It's really a question of how do you bring people to work together and have a fresher look, basically, at the territory they're living in. And the conversation that was just before the one we're having was all about, saving the planet and saving, protecting the animals, etc., etc. Do you think design can help approach, let's say, the same goal, but let's say on a more local scale? I know that, for example, we have all seen these images of, trying to capture plastic in the ocean, for example. And I know that most of the, let's say, tangible solutions that were brought in came from designers.
Can design save the world? I don't know. I don't think so. Sadly.
Lukas, maybe you think differently.
Maybe you can save the world. No, I think saving
so.
the world is quite a big task for a single discipline or a single person. I do believe, though, thinking like design has an important role here, of course, because design is always connecting people and whatever else there is. This is the core definition of design, to be a connector, to be the adherent between different entities. And so therefore I do believe that design has an important role in that, yes, and designers have interesting ideas. Again, if those ideas you know, it's a big problem. It's to save the world, to get rid of plastics in the ocean. It's I would claim probably we need more than one designer, more than one initiative, more than one idea to solve that problem, because it's a very big one.
Yeah, of course. What I think it can do is, of course, to encourage others to also participate and in that human scale and this bottom-up process as it's happening in LUMA. And what I also try with these structures that they still show a possibility for another person to link to it or to continue doing something. I think already that idea to include people in the process of doing it and also seeing it in a stage as we show it here, which is totally unfinished and still leaves many questions open, I think is a interesting phase now that it also what we just realized in the last day standing here was that people had very many ideas already what we could do with it and what the material could turn into and ideas how to improve, and I think that is very interesting that it's encouraging.
Which brings us back to open source and crowd
Yeah.
and so on. What I'm also thinking about is yet another exhibition about robots and about technology that we did at the museum. And unfortunately, I can't remember the details, but I do remember that I researched this. Basically, it was scientific research, but in a gamification kind of way. And so crowds of people were asked to find specific, I don't know, some scientific bacteria or whatever kind of thing that they should detect. And as a crowd, humans were better than any algorithm, than any AI, than any technology. And I find that really quite comforting. And, you know, it sounds so banal. Together we're strong. But then, you know, it's just true. and I think, you know, if everyone does a very tiny thing, like everyone's looking at one of these bacteria combinations, I think it was about finding a specific way of something like that. Mm-hmm. Now everyone looks at one individual single thing locally, human scale, and so on. Then, you know, as a network, it becomes quite powerful. And although it does sound so banal, but then on the other side,
yeah, it's the addition and accumulation that will make the difference.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bit lame to come up with this as a solution for the world, but I guess that's probably it. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, it's the question of empowering, which I think is, you know, open source allows people to do.
Yeah, but what's I think quite rare is that an institution really brings that space at that time. That something like this, what maybe sounds banal, but has the possibility to really grow, because we all do know that it would be interesting to do this kind of projects, but we are so much in our schedules, life, and that it's just not happening so often, and that's what I think is...
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do in Arles, is actually provide people with space and with an environment, and trying to create an ecosystem where, you know, this cross-disciplinary approach and having the time and space to research and develop things has brought us to actually what is, you know, a fairly quick result, because it's in about less than 2 years probably that we have developed the types of materials that we have been developing. What I find also, I think, is quite interesting, because I've had, you know, very basic representation of design, which is like the end product in a way, is the fact of designing a new material. And this is actually opening so many possibilities. And it's true that everybody becomes creative, by then, because just by showing material, people come up with ideas to try and use them already.
And again, it's really about the idea, because you can, I don't know, you use sunflower seeds or remainders of the production for the production in the Camargue region, but you may find another equally suitable material elsewhere, but process it in a similar or the same way. So really, it's like, I don't know, it's like clay and bricks. You have very red bricks in one area and very brownish or yellow bricks in another area. Yet, it's a different material, yet it's the same type of process and ultimately the same product in a way. And I think this is really interesting about about this type of research. So to really, and this is where it becomes universal.
Exactly.
You have an idea that suits different perspectives or different local or individual frameworks, if you want. And I think that makes it really interesting. That makes it interesting on a larger scale than just the Camargue region. I think it's interesting to look at what do you guys do with these sunflower seeds?
Absolutely. We use the sunflower to create energy, and then we use the waste to create this material. Basically, we are going full circle in a way on the use of one single element, and the idea is really to not only do it on our scale, but also scale it up to the Mediterranean area as well. So it's trying to grow global, but reasonably in a way, trying to find from local solutions or local ideas, find global applications.
Yeah. It makes me think of someone, a really great designer in Mexico, who works with corn, local corn, and tries to develop materials and veneer and different types of things beyond the corn itself as a food.
Yeah.
Maybe there are remainders in corn that could be used like
Totally.
sunflower remainders, and I think that makes it really interesting. See that you can customize it according to where you are and just use the same principles. And I think this is also a very valid way to go forward in many different possibilities to explore these local applications of a universal idea. I think that's something that is really interesting.
No, absolutely. So that's what we're trying to show actually in the installation we have next door, and you're most welcome to come and see it. I don't know whether you have any final word to say to conclude the conversation, but I think we pretty much came to the idea of let's say developing from local values and local resources and local talents, ideas and materials that could have, let's say, a more universal application in a way. I don't know whether you have any questions, but I would like to thank my colleagues here, Amelie and Lukas, for staying here. Thank you.
Thanks.